The whispers began years ago. Billions of dollars, stolen from the state year after year. Concerns over widespread fraud grew so intense that federal officials were dispatched to Minnesota to investigate. Public sentiment was divided, with some openly stating, "I don't want them in our country," but the full scale of the crisis remained hidden until one frigid morning. At 4:32 a.m., federal agents shattered the front door of an $8, $2 million estate on the shores of Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota. Inside, they would discover the nerve center of the largest financial fraud conspiracy in American history. $19. $4 billion stolen, laundered, and weaponized. At the heart of it all was State Senator Dahrir Hassan, a Somali-born politician who allegedly twisted the American dream into a criminal empire stretching from the frozen streets of Minneapolis to the hot dust of Mogadishu, from the vaults of Dubai to the tunnels beneath the Mexican border. This morning, that empire began to crumble. Welcome to Border Watch Daily, where we expose the hidden threats at our borders and within our communities. Today, we delve into a story so shocking, it will redefine your understanding of corruption and betrayal, revealing how a system designed to help was meticulously weaponized against the very people it was meant to protect. The temperature read -33, 3 degrees Celsius, with a wind chill making it feel closer to -42, 8 degrees Celsius. It was the kind of cold that turned breath into ice crystals before they hit the ground, the kind that kept every sane person huddled indoors, waiting for dawn. But dawn would not come peacefully today. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, at precisely 4:32 a.m., 67 federal agents emerged from the darkness. From the FBI, ICE, DEA, DHS, Inspector General, and IRS criminal investigation, they moved in synchronized formations. 3-person tactical units, weapons raised, infrared sights cutting red lines through the frozen fog that blanketed the streets. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just a soft crunch of boots on black ice and the metallic click of breaching tools locking into position. The Cedar Riverside neighborhood, affectionately known by locals as Little Mogadishu, lay silent under a bruised purple sky. Skyscrapers rose like tombstones, storefronts were shuttered, and intersections empty. The district appeared abandoned, but it was not. Behind every darkened window, people were watching, waiting. They had known something was coming. One always knows when the wolves are circling. The lead team stacked outside a 5-story community center on Cedar Avenue. The building's facade was decorated with colorful murals depicting Somali culture, unity, and hope. The sign above the entrance read, "Cedar Unity Resource Foundation, serving our community since 2017. An agent raised a battering ram. 2 breaths, then the door exploded inward with a deafening crack. Flashbangs detonated in rapid succession. A voice from a previous operation echoed, "In Minneapolis so far, we've brought hundreds of dangerous criminals off the streets, dangerous to society and dangerous to that community. Open the door." Another voice affirmed, "Operations continue unabated in Minneapolis. Several individuals involved in criminal activities have been taken off the streets, yet again over the past 24 hours. That is what we're here to do, and we will not be deterred. We are going to take these criminals off the street and make America a safer place, make Minneapolis a safer place again. That is why we're here." The raid struck 9 locations simultaneously across the Twin Cities metro area. While the lead team swept the Cedar Unity Resource Foundation, a second strike force breached a converted warehouse in Burnsville, 37 kilometers south. A third team descended on a cluster of wellness clinics scattered across South Minneapolis and Street Pole. A fourth secured a luxury estate in Wayzata with a private dock and helicopter pad. A fifth stormed a trucking depot near the Canadian border in Roseau. A sixth hit a money transfer business in the heart of downtown Minneapolis. A seventh surrounded a halal grocery distribution center in Richfield. An eighth moved on a software solutions consulting firm in Bloomington. A ninth sealed off a waterfront property on the Mississippi River valued at $4, $7 million, purchased entirely in cash through a shell corporation registered in Djibouti. Inside the Cedar Unity Resource Foundation, agents uncovered the counting room. It was tucked behind a false wall in what was ostensibly a conference space used for ESL classes and citizenship workshops. The wall swung open on hydraulic hinges, revealing 6 industrial cash counting machines humming on a polished oak table. Shrink-wrapped bricks of $100 bills were stacked floor to ceiling like masonry. The air smelled of ink and old paper. A conservative estimate on site put the cash at $14, $3 million. But the money was not the bombshell. Mounted on the wall, where one might expect a community calendar or bulletin board, was something else entirely, a massive laminated flowchart. It depicted 34 different non-profit organizations, each connected by red lines to offshore bank accounts in Dubai, Nairobi, Istanbul, and Mexico City. Shell corporations were layered on top of ghost entities, which in turn were layered on top of sham charities. At the very center of this intricate web was a single name, Horizon Global Development LLC, with a registered address as a mailbox in Dubai. The sole authorized signatory, State Senator Dahrir Hassan. One of the agents took a photo. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They all knew what they were looking at. This wasn't merely corruption, this was command-level collusion. At the Burnsville warehouse, the DEA Special Response Unit kicked in the loading dock doors at exactly 4:41 a.m. A voice from a Department of Homeland Security official stated, "Since January, the Department of Homeland Security has arrested over 480,000 individuals involved in illegal activities. 70% of those individuals have criminal charges against them or have been convicted. Go, open the door." Agents expected to find pallets of rice, canned goods, medical supplies, standard humanitarian aid shipments destined for refugee communities. What they found instead made 3 veteran agents immediately step outside to vomit. The chemical stench was overwhelming. Eyes burned, throats constricted, and the air tasted like metal and death. This was not a food distribution center, this was a fentanyl superlab disguised as a charity warehouse. Inside, burlap sacks labeled USAID emergency relief supplies were stacked 6 meters high. Agents sliced one open. No rice, no beans. Instead, vacuum-sealed bricks of pure fentanyl powder. Some bricks bore the scorpion stamp of the Sinaloa cartel, others carried markings linked to CJNG operations out of Jalisco. Still others showed symbols investigators didn't even recognize yet, new players, new routes, new threats. The preliminary count revealed 940 kilograms of fentanyl, with a street value of approximately $423 million. Enough poison to kill 470 million people. One agent, a 15-year DEA veteran named Torres, stood in the middle of the warehouse, staring at the mountain of death, and muttered a single sentence that would later appear in the official report. This is the largest single fentanyl seizure in the history of the Midwest. But they were just getting started. In a temperature-controlled back room, agents discovered industrial pill presses, the kind used to manufacture counterfeit prescription pills. Stacks of molds were designed to replicate Percocet, Xanax, and Adderall. Beside the presses were 1 million finished fentanyl pills, packaged in bottles with fake pharmacy labels ready for distribution. And in the corner, behind a steel door secured with a biometric lock, they found the workers. 43 people, men and women aged 19 to 52, crammed into an airless storage room that reeked of sweat and fear. There were no windows, no ventilation, just a single toilet in the corner and sleeping mats on concrete. Most of them were malnourished. Several had chemical burns on their hands and arms from handling fentanyl powder without protective equipment. These were not employees, they were human trafficking victims. One woman, barely conscious, whispered to an agent in broken English, "We were promised jobs. We were promised America. What they got instead was slavery." We need to pause here and go back, because to understand how this empire was built, you need to understand the man who constructed it. State Senator Dahrir Hassan was born in Mogadishu in 1984. He fled the Somali civil war as a 9-year-old refugee, arriving in Minneapolis with his mother, 2 sisters, and a single suitcase containing everything they owned. It was a classic American dream story, the kind told at fundraisers and campaign rallies. He graduated from the University of Minnesota with honors, earned a law degree, and founded 5 non-profit organizations dedicated to refugee resettlement, job training, and community assistance. By 31, he won a seat in the Minnesota State Senate, becoming the youngest Somali American ever elected to state office. He was a symbol of resilience, a voice for the voiceless. He gave speeches about justice, about opportunity, about the promise of America. Yet, behind every speech, every press conference, and every photo op with smiling families, he was building something else. A fraud machine so sophisticated, so automated, and so deeply embedded in the political and bureaucratic infrastructure of Minnesota that it operated in plain sight for 7 years without anyone stopping it. Because who would dare question a refugee advocate? Who would risk being called a racist for asking where the money was going? Silence, it turns out, is the most valuable currency in America, and Senator Dahrir Hassan bought silence by the truckload. At 7:03 a.m., at the FBI Cyber Forensics Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, 3 encrypted hard drives recovered from Senator Hassan's private estate were mounted in an air-gapped analysis system. The encryption was military-grade, purchased from a former NSA contractor currently serving 12 years in federal prison for selling classified cyber tools to foreign governments. It took analysts 4 hours to crack the first drive. What they found would eventually fill 6,400 pages of federal indictments. The operation had a code name, Project Sahel. The network diagram sprawled across 8 monitors, displaying shell companies, ghost corporations, fake charities, phantom clinics, and sham consulting firms. Money flowed in loops so complex it resembled abstract art. But strip away the complexity, and the core mechanism was brutally simple. The core mechanism involved 5 steps. Step 1, acquire stolen identities. Senator Hassan's network purchased the personal information of approximately 143,000 Somali immigrants from dark web marketplaces and corrupt immigration officials. This included social security numbers, dates of birth, addresses, and immigration documents, everything needed to create phantom patients who existed on paper but nowhere else. Step 2. Create phantom clinics. 29 wellness centers, mental health facilities, and refugee assistance programs were established across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. They had addresses, websites, brochures, and state licenses, but no actual patients, no actual staff, and no actual services, just billing codes. Step 3. Automate the fraud. Custom software designed by a team of programmers in Nairobi and operated from servers hidden in the basement of the SIDA Unity Resource Foundation generated thousands of fraudulent Medicaid and welfare claims every single day. Patient A received trauma counseling for $620. Patient B received autism therapy for $1,340. Patient C received housing assistance for $890. Patient D received addiction treatment for $1,150. The claims were randomized to avoid pattern detection, the approval process was automatic, and the payments flowed like clockwork. Step 4. Launder the money. Funds moved from Minnesota state accounts to the phantom clinics, from the clinics to fiscal sponsors, from the sponsors to shell companies in Nevada, Delaware, and Wyoming, from the shell companies to offshore accounts in Dubai, Nairobi, Istanbul, and Mexico City, from those accounts to cryptocurrency wallets, from the wallets to real estate purchases, luxury goods, and cartel investments. Step 5. Reinvest in the empire. According to the encrypted files, approximately 68% of the stolen funds were funneled into 3 enterprises. The first was political influence. Campaign contributions to state legislators, consulting fees to bureaucrats, payments to journalists who would write glowing profiles and attack anyone asking questions, and donations to advocacy groups that would scream racism and Islamophobia if anyone scrutinized the operation. The second was real estate. Properties across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, hotels, apartment complexes, strip malls, gas stations, all purchased through front companies, all generating income, and all providing cover for money laundering. The third, and most chilling, was narcotics. Senator Dahrir Hassan, the symbol of hope, the advocate for refugees, the man who gave speeches about justice, had become a major financial partner in the Sinaloa cartel's fentanyl distribution network. The connection between Minneapolis and Sinaloa seemed impossible until the logistics were understood. The Sinaloa cartel had a problem. They could manufacture fentanyl in virtually unlimited quantities at labs across Mexico, but distribution into the American heartland was becoming difficult. Border enforcement had tightened under pressure, and traditional smuggling routes through Texas, Arizona, and California were under constant federal surveillance. They needed new pathways, new partners, and new cover. Senator Hassan provided all three. The arrangement, reconstructed from seized communications, financial records, and testimony from informants, worked like this. Phase 1. Stolen welfare funds were wired to accounts in Dubai and converted to cryptocurrency Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, untraceable, instant, and global. Phase 2. The cryptocurrency was transferred to cartel-controlled wallets operated by financial brokers in Mexico City and Guadalajara. Phase 3. The cartel used the funds to purchase precursor chemicals from suppliers in China and India. These chemicals were then shipped to Mexican ports with falsified manifests. Phase 4. The chemicals arrived at cartel labs in Culiacan and Tijuana, where they were synthesized into pure fentanyl powder and pressed into counterfeit pills. Phase 5. The finished product was loaded into trucks marked as humanitarian aid shipments destined for Somali refugee communities in Minnesota. The trucks carried forged documents from fake charities. The manifests listed rice, beans, medical supplies, and clothing. What they actually carried was death. Here was the genius of it. Humanitarian aid trucks receive priority processing at US border checkpoints. They are rarely inspected. Who would suspect charity workers of smuggling poison? The trucks crossed at ports of entry in Laredo, El Paso, and San Diego, and inspectors waved them through. The drivers, many of them unaware of what they were carrying, delivered the shipments to the Burnsville warehouse. From there, the fentanyl was repackaged and distributed through a network of convenience stores, money transfer businesses, halal grocery stores, and small restaurants owned by shell companies connected to Senator Hassan's network. The proceeds flowed back into the same financial circuits. More fraud, more drugs, more corruption, a closed loop, a perpetual motion machine of crime, and it operated for nearly 7 years without anyone stopping it. At 8:47 a.m. in Wayzata, Minnesota, the sun was rising over Lake Minnetonka, painting the frozen surface in shades of gold and crimson. It would have been beautiful if not for the Black Hawk helicopter circling overhead and the armored FBI vehicles blocking the private drive of a gated lakefront estate. State Senator Dahrir Hassan answered the door in a tailored navy suit, holding a cup of Turkish coffee. He looked at the agents with a calm, measured expression of a man who had prepared for this moment. No surprise, no panic, just cold calculation. The lead agent held up a warrant. Senator Hassan, you are under arrest. The charges: 80. 3 felony counts, including racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, human trafficking, forced labor, conspiracy to defraud the United States, bribery of public officials, identity theft, and immigration fraud. Hassan set the coffee cup down on a marble console table and uttered 5 words: "I want my attorney present." Then, silence. They led him out in handcuffs. News helicopters captured every second. The image would dominate every screen in America within 30 minutes. The refugee success story, the political rising star, the voice of the marginalized walking to a federal vehicle in handcuffs, his $4,000 suit catching the morning light. But Hassan was just one node in a much larger network. And that network was about to face a coordinated nationwide takedown unlike anything the Midwest had ever seen. Senator Hassan did not build his empire alone, he had help. Help from people who had sworn oaths to protect the public. Analysis of seized servers, encrypted communications, and bank records revealed a secondary network operating within Minnesota state government, law enforcement, and the judiciary. 17 police officers across Minneapolis Street, Paul, and Bloomington had been receiving monthly payments averaging $12,000 each. In exchange, they provided advance warning of investigations, falsified patrol logs to cover drug shipments, and ensured certain neighborhoods were never scrutinized. One officer, a 15-year veteran named Greg Paulson, had been paid over $840,000 since 2019. His job was to monitor federal wiretap requests and alert the network if any surveillance operations were being planned. 9 state welfare auditors had been receiving quarterly bonuses disguised as consulting fees. Their role was to approve fraudulent Medicaid claims without question and bury any red flags raised by automated fraud detection systems. 4 county judges had received substantial campaign contributions from Hassan-affiliated donors. Court records showed a disturbing pattern. Cases involving network members were consistently dismissed, delayed, or resolved with minimal penalties. Drug charges vanished, fraud cases stalled, and witnesses suddenly refused to testify. 6 state legislators, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, had been receiving payments through fake consulting arrangements and shell companies. Their job was to block any legislation that would increase oversight of welfare programs, refugee assistance funding, or non-profit transparency requirements. And at the very top of this pyramid of corruption sat a name that would send shockwaves through the entire state: Attorney General Marcus Doherty. According to encrypted messages recovered from Senator Hassan's personal devices, Attorney General Doherty had been receiving monthly payments of $75,000 for the past 4 years. His role was simple: ensure no state-level investigations ever gained traction. If federal investigators came sniffing around, he was to provide advance warning. If whistleblowers emerged, he was to discredit them. If journalists asked questions, he was to threaten legal action. Doherty was arrested at his office in Downtown Street Paul at 11:32 a.m. while in the middle of a press conference about public integrity. The irony was not lost on anyone. At 3 p.m. at the FBI field office in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, Special Agent Reyes stood before a wall of monitors displaying the full scope of Operation Northern Veil. The numbers were staggering. $19. $4 billion in welfare fraud over 7 years. That was the headline, what would dominate every news cycle for months. But Reyes knew the real cost could not be measured in dollars. The fentanyl distributed through this network killed an estimated 6,800 Americans, mostly young people, who thought they were buying prescription painkillers and instead received poison pressed into pills. Overdose deaths in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa spiked during the exact period the distribution network was operating, devastating small towns, suburban neighborhoods, and college campuses. The human trafficking operation destroyed approximately 2,400 lives. People who came to America seeking freedom and safety, promised jobs, housing, and a path to citizenship. What they got instead was forced labor, sexual exploitation, and threats of violence if they spoke. The corruption eroded public trust in every institution designed to protect the vulnerable. Every legitimate refugee assistance program now fell under suspicion. Every honest social worker faced additional scrutiny. Every genuine asylum seeker confronted a system hardened by betrayal. And the political fallout was just beginning. At 6 p.m. from the Oval Office in Washington, D.C., the president addressed the nation. Today, federal law enforcement executed the largest coordinated takedown of a transnational criminal network in American history. What we discovered is not just fraud, it is betrayal. Betrayal of taxpayers, betrayal of refugees, betrayal of every American who believes in the promise of this country. $19. $4 billion stolen, laundered, used to fund drug cartels, human trafficking, and political corruption at the highest levels. This operation proves what we have been warning about for years. Our systems are being exploited, not by the vulnerable people we're trying to help, but by criminals who hide behind them, who use compassion as a shield, who turn generosity into a weapon. Today, that ends. He announced immediate policy changes, enhanced vetting for all refugee assistance organizations, mandatory forensic audits of state welfare programs, increased funding for fraud detection systems, a federal task force to investigate corruption within state governments, and stricter oversight of non-profit organizations receiving federal funds. The response was immediate and divided. Some praised the crackdown as long overdue. Others warned of a backlash against immigrant communities who had nothing to do with the fraud. Community leaders in Minneapolis held press conferences. Some expressed shock and anger. Others insisted the operation was politically motivated, while still others called for unity and a commitment to rebuild trust. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be quite the same. The story did not end with arrests. In the weeks following Operation Northern Veil, investigators continued to unravel the full scope of the conspiracy. They discovered that the network extended far beyond Minnesota, with shell companies in 17 countries, real estate holdings valued at over $940 million, cryptocurrency wallets containing approximately $1, $2 billion, and bank accounts in Dubai, Nairobi, Istanbul, Beirut, and the Cayman Islands. They uncovered connections to other cartel operations, not just Sinaloa, but also the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, and emerging Somali crime syndicates operating in East Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. They found that Senator Hassan's network had been coordinating with international human smuggling rings, moving people from Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan, and Yemen through Libya, across the Mediterranean, through Central America, and finally into the United States, charging each victim between $40,000 and $90,000 for passage. They discovered evidence of money laundering through green energy grants, where fake solar panel installation companies received millions in federal subsidies and funneled the money into cartel accounts. They uncovered falsified records at borderway stations, where inspectors were bribed to shut down for maintenance whenever drug convoys passed through. And finally, they discovered a master plan hidden in encrypted files on Senator Hassan's personal laptop. The plan was titled Phase 3: Continental Integration. The goal: transform Minnesota into the permanent logistics hub for a transcontinental criminal network spanning from Mogadishu to Mexico City to Montreal. To create a shadow infrastructure of controlled politicians, corrupted law enforcement, and purchased judges capable of shielding cartel operations for decades, effectively turning the heartland into a fortress. And it almost worked. The trial of State Senator Dahrir Hassan is scheduled to begin in federal court in Minneapolis in April 2026. Prosecutors are seeking life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The evidence includes approximately 3 million pages of documents, 1,240 hours of recorded communications, and testimony from 412 witnesses. Yet, his defense team has already signaled their strategy. Hassan was a figurehead manipulated by more powerful forces. He was targeted because of his ethnicity and his advocacy. The charges are politically motivated. The prosecution's response is simple: the evidence speaks for itself. Attorney General Marcus Doherty has pleaded not guilty to 67 federal charges and faces a maximum sentence of 420 years in prison. The 17 police officers, 9 auditors, 4 judges, and 6 legislators arrested in the operation are awaiting trial. Most have been denied bail. The 2,400 trafficking victims rescued during Operation Northern Veil are receiving medical care, legal assistance, and trauma counseling. Immigration authorities have granted them special protected status. Their testimony will be crucial in prosecuting not just the Minneapolis network, but the international cartel connections that span 3 continents. The investigation continues every day. New names surface, new connections emerge, and new crimes are uncovered. Federal investigators are now following the money into Ohio, Texas, California, New York, and Florida. They are coordinating with Interpol, Europol, and law enforcement agencies in Somalia, Kenya, Turkey, and Mexico, building cases that will take years to prosecute. This story isn't just about one senator. It's about a system that was almost completely taken over by criminals who understood one simple truth: power doesn't always need violence. Sometimes it only needs silence. So, what does this story tell us? It tells us that corruption doesn't always wear a villain's mask. Sometimes it wears the face of compassion. Sometimes it speaks the language of justice and hides behind causes so righteous that questioning them feels like hatred. It tells us that systems designed to help can be weaponized to harm, and that oversight isn't oppression, it's protection. It tells us that the people who suffer most from this kind of corruption are the very communities the criminals claim to serve. The legitimate refugees whose reputations are destroyed, the honest social workers whose programs lose funding, the vulnerable families who lose access to services because criminals stole the resources meant for them. And it tells us that silence has a price. For years, people who questioned the rapid expansion of refugee assistance programs in Minnesota were dismissed as bigots. People who pointed to irregularities in billing patterns were accused of racism. People who asked basic questions about accountability were silenced by mobs shouting Islamophobia. That silence cost $19. $4 billion? It cost 6,800 lives lost to fentanyl. It cost 2,400 people their freedom. It cost an entire state its trust in the institutions designed to protect it. Power doesn't need armies when it can buy silence with accusations. The sun sets over Minneapolis. The temperature drops back below -33 degrees Celsius. The Cedar Riverside district is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet now. The quiet of a community processing betrayal, the quiet of investigators still sifting through mountains of evidence, the quiet of a system beginning the long, painful process of rebuilding. In the federal detention facility downtown, State Senator Dahrir Hassan sits in a holding cell awaiting arraignment. The tailored suit has been replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The Turkish coffee is gone. The calm, measured expression has cracked. In homes across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, families of overdose victims are learning that the drugs that killed their children came through networks funded by their own tax dollars and protected by their own elected officials. In the Burnsville warehouse, forensic teams continue processing evidence, estimating it will take 18 months to fully catalog everything seized. And in Washington, policymakers are grappling with questions that have no easy answers. How do you protect vulnerable refugees while preventing criminal exploitation? How do you maintain oversight without creating barriers to genuine assistance? How do you rebuild trust in systems that have been so thoroughly corrupted? These questions don't have simple answers, but they must be asked, because the alternative is silence. And we've seen what silence costs. This story isn't over. The investigation continues in Ohio, Texas, California, Arizona, New York, and Florida. Wherever these networks operate, investigators are following the money, tracking the connections, and building the cases. This is not the end of the story, this is just the beginning. Justice is slow, justice is imperfect, but justice is coming. The only thing that enables corruption to flourish is silence. And silence, as Minneapolis learned, comes at a price none of us can afford to pay.